Morning. I work in retail. I know many of you are aware of the fact that I have a part-time job at Menards. As a result of my employment there, I have seen and noticed things that I probably wouldn't have noticed as a consumer, especially when it comes to retail theft. For example, just yesterday, while I was putting out some new stock, I noticed this small white box near the back of a shelf, and next to it was this clear plastic case that the box had been in. The contents of the white box, approximately $30 worth of flea control for dogs, had been stolen. No big deal, right? I mean, what's a $30 loss to a big company like Menards? Well, I can tell you that far more than $30 worth of merchandise gets stolen from the store every year. Fact is, almost every single Monday morning I find some type of packaging that points to the fact the theft took place in the department that I work in over the weekend. And people don't just open packages and steal the contents. We've had people load up shopping carts and attempt to bypass checking out. We've had people go to the store and put stickers of barcodes from cheap items on expensive items and then attempt to check out. The one thing, though, the one thing that somebody's been doing that really bothers me because it creates messes that I end up having to clean up is intentionally tearing holes in the bags of the birdseed. And trust me on this, it's intentional. Because I work with those bags of bird food pretty much on a daily basis, and the plastic that they come in, it's not torn easily. And when you go in on a day and you've got 2 or 3 bags of birdseed that have been torn open and moved to the back of the shelf, you know it's intentional. There was a point, by the way, pre-COVID when I kept track, and I shared my findings with the management. I told them, at the rate that we were looking at, you're looking at a $3,000 to $4,000 loss of product in the year. I don't know. I really don't know how much retail theft takes place at the store. I'm sure the GMs do. But I do know that nationally, around $100 billion worth of merchandise is shoplifted every year in America. I also know that just yesterday there was a news article talking about the California state government introducing a $267 million program to help eliminate the growing rash of organized, what they call smash and grab retail thefts, where large groups of masked people rush into stores, they smash open the display cases, they fill their bags with expensive items, and then they run out. Now I'm guessing that when I mentioned those smash and grab thefts, most of us here probably had this internal reaction that said, man, that's wrong. That's just terrible. That is so wrong. That's so sinful. I think we'd probably react the same if I were to bring up the number of armed robberies that took place last year in St. Louis. I think all of us bristle. I think we bristle at certain forms of theft, and we think of them as being so very wrong, so horrible, so sinful. But then I think there are other forms of theft that we don't feel so strongly opposed to. Forms of theft that are much more socially acceptable, such as accepting incorrect change when it's in your favor, or not telling the cashier that they undercharged you. How about overestimating your tax deductions? About watching TikTok or being on Facebook when you're on the clock. Wait a minute. That's theft? It's reported that 20% of every dollar earned by a company in the United States is lost to some type of employee theft. How about making use of a friend or family member's paid online subscription instead of personally paying for it yourself? How about not reducing the final invoice on a job when it took a whole lot less hours of labor to complete it than estimated? What about attending worship services and never giving any financial support to the church? What about taking out a student loan with no intention of paying it back, counting on the government to forgive it? Is that theft? What about turning in somebody else's written work for your own? I learned this week there are some actual websites out there, folks, designed to help high school and college students plagiarize written material without getting caught. And there's some disturbing numbers out there about high schoolers. According to the surveys, 64% of them admit to cheating on tests, 58% admit to plagiarizing, and a whopping 95% admit to some form of cheating. Maybe they copied somebody else's homework, maybe they worked with somebody else on a project that they were supposed to work on alone, and so on. It's something that I saw this week for the first time I got really mixed feelings about was this website that uses artificial intelligence. You ready for this? Artificial intelligence for preachers to create sermons. When I was Googling today's scripture passage, it popped up. Here you go. Here's the website. Artificial intelligence can create your sermon for you, basically is what it said. I thought about saying that. I didn't use that website today, but I thought somebody might say a little bit too loudly, yeah, we can tell. Chris Talton, the Baptist preacher whose sermon titled Stop Theft, mentioned a few of these things that I've said, and which got me to thinking of the many forms that theft can take, went on to write how people justify stealing for a variety of reasons, including their being overcharged, they're needing something but not having the means to purchase it, they're not wanting to wait till they can afford something to go ahead and get it. You know, we've been digging into the New Testament book of Ephesians for a while now, and we're going to go there again this morning. I encourage you to open a Bible or Bible app to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. And while you're doing that, I'm going to remind you how in this series what we've seen is Paul took the first 3 chapters of the letter and he went into detail about the wonderful things in those chapters that God has done for us, is doing for us, and promises to do for followers of Christ in the future. And then we've also seen in this series how Paul transitioned from writing about, the wonderful things that God's done, is doing, and will do, to how Christians should live differently than unbelievers in response to all this that God has done, doing, and will do for us. And Paul gave us this word picture. We saw how he gave us this word picture of taking off old clothes and putting on new ones to help us understand that living differently type of lifestyle involves our getting rid of something in our lives and replacing it with something else. Paul basically goes on to use this formula that says, Christians shouldn't do this. That's what they should take off. They shouldn't do this, but instead they should do this. That's what they put on. Paul makes use of that particular formula 5 times in this letter, and we've already looked at 2. We looked at the 2 that dealt with lying and anger. And this morning we're going to look at the 3rd, which deals with stealing. We're going to zero in on just one verse this morning, verse 28 from chapter 4. Verse 28 from chapter 4. Here's how the verse reads in the New International Version of the Bible. Anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. The first, and I think the most obvious point that Paul makes, actually God makes, friends, through this letter that he directed Paul to write, is that followers of Jesus should not steal. Followers of Jesus should not steal. Now, I know we already know we're not supposed to steal, right? I mean, that's the 8th commandment after all. And we know, of course, that 8th commandment forbids things like armed robbery, forbids things like shoplifting. But are we aware? Do we understand? Do we accept that also includes stealing an undeserved grade at school through plagiarism or cheating? That it includes taking home and keeping for your personal use ink pens, paper clips, postage stamps from your place of employment? That it includes intentionally underpaying your taxes? That it includes stealing someone's good name or reputation through slander or gossip? That it includes stealing glory that belongs to God and giving it to men? And do we understand and do we believe that stealing is not just the actual taking of something that belongs to somebody else, but stealing takes place in our hearts with our wanting to take something that belongs to someone else. Here's the thing, friends. I think God is speaking through Paul here, yes, to tell us that followers of Jesus should not actually take things that belong to others, but I also think God's speaking through Paul's letter here to let us know that followers of Jesus are to get rid of their desires to take what belongs to someone else. By the way, let me clarify something so I'm not misunderstood on this. I'm not saying, by any means, I am not saying that followers of Jesus cannot have ambitions. I'm not saying that you, as a follower of Jesus, couldn't go to your friend's house and walk into the garage and see this great display of tools there and think to yourselves, man, I'd love to have a tool display like that. I'm not saying followers of Jesus, can't, a single Christian, I'm not saying that they can't look at somebody else's marriage partner and think to themselves, man, I'd like to marry someone like that. I'm not saying it's wrong for Christians to have ambitions, but it's wrong for followers of Jesus to want to take something from someone else. It's wrong for a follower of Jesus to go into their friend's garage and see their friend's tools and then start plotting on how they're going to steal them. It's wrong for a Christian to look at somebody else's marriage partner and start thinking, I want that person. Not someone like them, but I want that person for me. In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus made use of verbal formula. Instead of using the formula, stop doing this and do this, like that we find here in Ephesians, Jesus made use of the formula, you've heard it said, but I say to you. And he used that formula 6 different times in the Sermon on the Mount to correct some false teaching and false ideas that were circulating in his day. You'll find all 6 of those in Matthew chapter 5. But the thing that is, Jesus used that formula to expose the false idea that was apparently prevalent in his day, that sin only occurs when we actually physically do something that God forbids. Jesus used that formula to teach us that we can commit sin in our minds, in our hearts, and not just with our bodies. Jesus taught that a person's harboring of anger, harboring of ill will against somebody, he says that person is just as guilty. He taught that person is just as guilty of sin, just as liable to judgment as the person who actually goes out and takes the physical life of somebody. Jesus taught that the person who lusts after another person is guilty of committing adultery, even though they haven't physically committed the sin. You see, Jesus' point, I think, was to show us that sin isn't just about what we actually do with our bodies. Sin takes place when we want to do what we shouldn't do. In other words, you see, Jesus taught us that sin has to do with actions and motives. And I'm bringing all this up because I really think that this verse is primarily about our taking on new motives. And that's what God's wanting us to take aim at in this verse on not stealing. You see, in this verse, friends, God is saying to us, followers of Jesus, that they should not only not steal things with their hands, but followers of Jesus should not even want to steal others' things. When it comes to their work, this verse is letting us know that followers of Jesus should be motivated to work for reasons that are very different from what motivates unbelievers to want to work. Think about this. Who's the thief thinking about when they're stealing? Is the thief thinking about the person they're stealing from or the company they're stealing from? Of course not. They're thinking only of themselves. Selfishly, they're thinking only of themselves. The thief recognizes that that thing belongs to somebody else or to some company or whatever, but they don't care about the person. They don't care about the person. They just want what they want. And they don't want to have to pay for it, and so they take it, no matter how much it costs the other person. The thief's actions are intentionally hurtful. The actions of followers of Jesus, though, are to be intentionally helpful. And that's why God has Paul say to those first century Christians in Ephesus, and in fact to all Christians of all time through the living and active nature of Scripture, that if selfishly you have been stealing in whatever way, stop it. That's what God is saying through Paul. He's saying, if you've been stealing, stop it. God is saying through this verse, I don't want you living selfishly. I want you to live unselfish lives. And that means instead of selfishly and wrongly taking for yourselves what belongs to others and what others have paid for, that you work so that you can rightfully pay for things and give to those in need. What we're talking about here is Christians having a very countercultural approach to their employment. You know, our cultural thinking, I was thinking about all this. Our cultural thinking lines up well with the first part of verse 28. I mean, our culture's line of thinking is, hey, it's good. It's right for people to stop stealing. And our cultural thinking lines up, I think, very well with that second part of the verse, which our culture would say it's good, for people not to steal. It's good for people to work. It's good for them to have honest employment. But the last part of this verse that says, work so you can have something to share with those in need, that's not something you're going to hear very often, if at all, in our culture. I did a quick internet research for reasons to work. And I looked at the answers that were given on several different websites. And I will tell you that I agree, with what most of those websites listed were good reasons to work. For instance, the website jobscan.com gave the following 10 benefits or 10 reasons for working a 9-to-5 type of job. These, they say, are good reasons to do that. A regular paycheck, a sense of identity, intellectual challenge. You learn new skills. You meet new people. You gain access to the community. You understand the world better. You develop a work-life balance. You get this sense of meaning and purpose. You can have health benefits. The Vision Company's website listed 5 reasons to work other than money. So I was kind of intrigued by that, and I looked at it. Their reasons include a chance to meet new people, a sense of purpose and value, a boost to your self-esteem, career security, and the ability to learn new things. Engage Employees website had a blog post listing the top 20 reasons for going to work. I'm not going to share all those, but it had 20. Employment First Florida shared 3 reasons to work. CEO Magazine had an article, 5+1 reasons why we work. And they all have all these good reasons for able-bodied people to work. But hear me now, none of them, and none of the other sites that I visited listed as a reason to work what we've just read here in verse 28, so that you can share with those who are in need. Something I also thought was very interesting, friends, is that none of those sites that I visited really listed what I think most Americans would commonly give in answer to the question, what's a good reason to work? I mean, I think if you or I were to go out into the public with the camera and a microphone and go up to people on the street and just say something like, since COVID, America has been facing this large, extreme, labor shortage. Lots of businesses, I'm sure you're aware of this, lots of businesses are having difficulty finding employees. And we want to encourage, able-bodied people who aren't working to get back to work or to seek employment. In your opinion, what would be good reasons that we could give to them as to why they ought to work, why they should go back to work, why they should seek employment? And I think if we were to do that, we'd get answers like, pretty simple to me. Hey, you work, you get paid. You get paid, you get food, huh? Simple as that. Or you might get an answer like, well, hey, tell them you like good things, right? Well, sure, everybody does. Getting a job will make it possible for you to buy good things. They might say things like, dude, hey, man, the pandemic's over. Go back to work, people, because the nation needs you. Someone might say, you ought to work so you can have a nice car, or work so you can buy a home, buy a house, or work so you can retire and travel the world at your time of your retirement. Work so you can have things to pass, so you can have something to pass along to your kids or your grandkids. And on. You see, we can go listing our culture's good reasons for working. But God, you see, had Paul write that followers of Jesus should work so that they can share with those in need. Work so that, you see, again, we're talking motives. We're talking about laying aside worldly motives for work and taking on the motives that God gives us. Now, I want to share just a few quick by-the-way points before sharing with you the things I see these verses really challenging us to do. The first, and by the way fact, is that the Greek word that's used there for work, folks, it involves the idea of working hard, working really hard, working to the point of fatigue or exhaustion. The second, by the way, point to take note of is that the people in need that Paul's referring to here, they're not people who are in need because they're lazy and they have chose not to work. The people in need that Paul's writing about here are those people who are in need because they're unable to work. Maybe they are physically handicapped. Maybe they're very ill. Maybe they're very elderly. Maybe they're living in an area where there are no jobs currently available. Maybe they're in need because they lost their job during some kind of a company restructuring process. Maybe they're victims of natural disaster or refugees of war. I feel pretty certain here Paul is not referring to helping people who are able to work but who refuse to do it, and as a result are in need. I'm pretty sure he's not talking about those types of people, because in another one of his letters, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10, Paul wrote this, "For even when we were with you, we gave you this rule. If a man will not work, he shall not eat." And a final, by the way, truth I just want to quickly mention is that many people mistakenly think of work as a part of the curse that God put on the world way back in the days of Adam and Eve. Friends, understand work was not part of the curse. Having work become more difficult, yes, that was a part of the curse, but work itself was not a part of the curse. The fact of the matter is, God gave Adam and Eve the task of working the Garden of Eden before they ever sinned, before a curse was ever put on the world. And a quick little FYI, just put this in the back of the hopper there. We're going to work in heaven. We're going to work in heaven. Okay, so how does this verse challenge us? What kind of responses is this calling for from you and I? I think, first of all, this verse challenges us to see work as a gift and an opportunity. Having a job, whether we're talking a paid position or not, I mean, you can do a job as a volunteer. You can do a job as a volunteer in your retirement. Having a job, whether you're paid or not, having a job provides us with opportunities, I believe, to bring glory to God, opportunities to support kingdom work, opportunities to be a contributor, a giver to the community, opportunities to help meet needs. Work's not a curse. And if we are able to work, we should be grateful to God that we're able, and we should make the most of it. And secondly, I think this verse challenges us to go about our work differently than people who aren't followers of Jesus. It challenges us not to steal from our employers by, taking unauthorized breaks or being lazy and only working hard when the boss is around or falsifying our timesheets. Christians are to show themselves different on the job. in their honesty and in their integrity, in their work ethic, in the attitude that they display, in the conversations that they engage in and those which they avoid, in the use of language. Christians, I think, ought to go about their jobs with a sense of joy and purpose, being happy that God is using them and working through them to help meet the needs of others through their employment. Third, I think this verse challenges us to see stealing in all of its forms as sin, and to stop excusing it, stop rationalizing it as if it's something else. I think when we totally get this connection, that stealing in all forms is a sin, when we totally get that in connection with what Paul wrote about what God did for us in those first 3 chapters, I think it'll move us internally to want to put off stealing and to want to put on work. It'll lead us to stop taking what isn't ours to take and being generous with what ours is to give. It'll motivate us to focus less and less on living for ourselves and to focus more and more on living for Christ and living for others. Fourth, we're challenged by this verse to see and approach our giving, whether we're talking about the giving of our time or our abilities, our possessions, or our money. We're motivated by this verse, or we're challenged by this verse to see and approach giving from the perspective of we get to, instead of we have to. We get to. We get to give, not we have to give. All the while being motivated by love. Love for others, love for Christ, more than being motivated by a sense of duty. Again, our attitude and motivation is key in this. Fifth and finally, we're challenged by this verse to make the move from theory to practice, to transition from thinking about sharing to help meet the needs of others to our actually doing it. Paul, who wrote this letter, he practiced what he preached, or we could say he practiced what he wrote. He did what he instructed the readers of his letter to do. Paul, when he lived in Ephesus, and you can read about this in the book of Acts, Paul, when he lived in Ephesus, he not only taught people about Jesus, he worked hard while he was there as a tent maker so that he could use the income that he made from his job not only to take care of his personal needs and the needs of those near him, but also so he could share with others who are in need. You know, the reality is there's a lot of need in the world. There's a lot of need. I won't jump into all the statistics, but I know that 13% of Illinoisans live at the poverty line or lower. There are a lot of people, even in the area, that are in need of physical food. Kids who go to bed at night without a meal. There are those needs here. There are needs all around the world for physical food and fresh water and shelter. There's a lot of need in the world for people to hear the message of Jesus. They've just not heard it yet. There's a lot of need for that. This verse begs the question of each of us, what are we sharing and doing to help meet those needs? As we approach our hymn of invitation and decision, I want to share this. I want to share one final illustration with you. Many of you are familiar with it, and I've used it before, but it's good enough, and it's pointed enough. It's worth repeating. The way the story goes, there's this one day a man was walking along the beach when he noticed this boy bending over, picking up something, and then gently throwing it back into the ocean. As he got closer to the boy, he stopped and he paused and he asked the boy, he says, "What are you doing?" And the young person replied, he said, "I'm throwing starfish back into the ocean. Surf's up, the tide's going out, and if I don't throw them back, they're going to die here on the shore." "Son," the guy said, "don't you realize there are miles and miles and miles of beach and hundreds upon hundreds and thousands of starfish? You can't make a difference." After listening very politely, the boy bent down, he picked up another starfish, and he threw it back into the surf. And then smiling at the man, he said, "Made a difference to that one." That starfish story by Lauren Isley reminds us all that while you and I cannot meet the needs of every person in the world, there will be those times when we'll have the means and the opportunity to make a difference to at least one. And when that opportunity presents itself, let's do what we believe Jesus would have us do. Let's share of ourselves, let's share of our means, but let's share to help meet the needs of others. As we